ask anyone in the film sphere what the most controversial film of all time is, the first thing they say might be The Last Temptation of Christ. But the second thing is probably The Last Jedi. And by the film sphere, I just mean people on YouTube. After all, the majority of audiences who saw The Last Jedi remember it fondly as that one Star Wars movie where Luke is old and stuff. However, online, it's created this whole micro-industry of people making videos, sometimes 4 or 5 times longer than the movie itself, complaining about how this film not only destroyed their childhood, but destroyed the future of Star Wars.
Hey everybody, Rian Johnson here. Sorry about that, me taking a huge giant dump. I was just too busy all over this Star Wars franchise.
This movie took everything that you like about Star Wars, that you love about Star Wars, that you thought you knew about Star Wars, and it on it. And it on it again, and then it sets it on fire, and then it on it again.
I don't even have one good fucking thing to say about this movie. It is just rancid diarrhea.
And while Disney's Star Wars cycle has garnered controversy since starting just over a decade ago, yes, it has been that long, The Last Jedi stands apart from most of the other entries. People aren't really talking about, say, the Obi-Wan show anymore, or that Book of Boba Fett series. Hell, even The Acolyte, despite its immense controversy upon release, has seen the conversation around it slow substantially. The sequel trilogy, naturally, stands out as the final third of the Skywalker saga, but even among those films, The Last Jedi stands out. And it's because it's the film with the most worth analyzing artistically. A film's artistic merit is subjective, of course, and it changes over time. Works like Moby Dick or the artwork of Van Gogh were seen as trash at the time of their debut, but later were re-embraced as masterworks. Now, am I saying The Last Jedi is the new Moby Dick? No, obviously not. What are you, stupid? There's no whales in it. But from a historic perspective, I do associate it with another great work of literature, reviled for changing the source material upon which it was based, which we will get to in the later half of this video. But the first half, let's talk right now about The Last Jedi. What is the big deal about this film? What is it about? Why do people seem to care so much? What's the controversy? And why does this controversy still persist years later? And why do I feel the compromised vision that Rian Johnson brought to Star Wars matters to this very day in the conversation surrounding Disney and its use of Star Wars as a brand? The Last Jedi follows up The Force Awakens, which was made by J.J. Abrams. Now, J.J. Abrams was given the unenviable task of revitalizing Star Wars for a new era after the controversial prequels. Prequels, mind you, at the time were the most reviled works of media around.
Star Wars The Phantom Menace was the most disappointing thing since my son.
And they have a ton of problems. The biggest, though, is how they relied on these giant ideas, but the execution of those ideas alienated audiences. The dialogue was sloppy.
I don't like sand.
The excessive effects looked bad and artificial, and the film industry was not ready for some of those effects to be such a big part of the filmmaking process. Several characters felt underdeveloped, and events often transpired without clear cause and effect. There's a statement from the writers of South Park where they say if you're writing a script and you say, the characters do this and this happened, they already reject it. It should be the characters do this so this happens, or but this happens. Cause, effect. Good storylines rely on cause and effect to drive action. And in the prequels, it often feels like cause and effect is kind of random. Take the first film, The Phantom Menace. Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon, go to meet the Trade Federation to settle some trade disputes. But droids attack because the Trade Federation wants to stop these discussions from happening. So they go to Naboo. And they encounter Jar Jar Binks. Now, you see right there, the cause and effect thing ends. They meet Jar Jar Binks, and they have to go to the capital of Naboo. So Jar Jar brings them to the Gungan City, and they go to Gungan City, and what does that have to do with getting to the capital? See, again, right there, it's a little murky. Yes, we know how it logically brings the characters to the Naboo capital, but it's a lot of murkiness. It doesn't seem like a logical series of events that transpire. Yes, before you comment, I know they go to Gungan City initially to avoid the Trade Federation droids because the city is hidden.
But the most safest place would be Gunga City. It's where I grew up. 'Tis a hidden city.
And yes, I am aware they go to Gungan City to get the vehicles, to travel to the planet core, to get to the Naboo capital. However, the problem is this isn't clearly communicated to us, and indeed it feels as though the action driving the narrative hits a wall. Like, yeah, is there an explanation for it? Yeah. Is there cause and effect? To an extent, sure. But the problem is, the audience doesn't see this clearly unless you're really paying attention to every single line. Which, let's be fair, the way Jar Jar talks, it can be a little difficult. Events are presented in a way that's very disjointed. Take Anakin and Padme's romance. It's often complicated by artificial romantic sets and this unnatural forced dialogue.
I don't like sand.
And that's not even getting into how aggressive Anakin comes across in Attack of the Clones.
It's all Obi-Wan's fault. He's jealous. He's holding me back.
What's wrong, Annie?
And again, their relationship is this is happening and they're having a romance. It doesn't feel like the romance is tied in with the events beyond there being a space facilitated for them to romance in. It doesn't feel organic. But that said, not all of the prequels are bad. Revenge of the Sith is the best of the prequels because I feel it's the easiest film to follow. You see very clearly how events lead into what follows. It is that cause and effect structure. You understand what everyone wants and what their motivations are, and it leads to scenes where the catharsis of the moment is presented on screen. It's not a great movie, but it feels like a cinematic story that has some weight behind the actions because we understand what events transpired to lead inevitably to the tragic conclusion. Now, Abrams, he saw the problem with the prequels, that it was disjointed, and with his films, he decided the direction to go in was to make the narrative flow feel cathartic. The Force Awakens is a highly structured film designed to give audience little time to linger on events that are happening. It's designed to please the average crowd, but as a result, the film leaves you with a lot of questions. For example, what's the First Order? We're never really told this in the first film. How is the Resistance, that is led by Leia, different from the New Republic they just built at the end of the previous trilogy? Who is Snoke? How did we get here, anyway? And while these answers would be partially answered by later shows like The Mandalorian and Ahsoka, we're left with no real answer here. I think it's telling how in The Force Awakens, the Starkiller base destroys the entire system that the Republican Senate is centered on, and audiences don't even know it happened. The average person probably doesn't even know that scene where they blow up all those planets. That's the Republican center. That's the center of the New Republic, and it's gone. And it's given no dignity. We are given no time to linger on how this impacts the saga. Things fall apart if the center can't hold. Well, Abrams didn't seem to talk about that, but Rian Johnson did. This is the philosophy between what Rian Johnson had to pick up versus what J.J. Abrams dropped off. Abrams was not interested in exploring how the First Order destroying the center of a republic can impact the loyalty between different systems. Rian Johnson was. This key philosophical difference guides the direction of both films. One is more introspective and thoughtful, the other is more of a breakneck action narrative. However, central to all the questions people had with The Force Awakens was one above all else. Why did Luke go looking for the first Jedi temple and just stay there? The whole film is centered on finding a map to find Luke Skywalker. It's the MacGuffin to drive action. Yet, we never really know why Luke left, what he's trying to accomplish, or what. It's more just trying to find him. And so Abrams left us off with a cliffhanger. Rey finding Luke, handing off the lightsaber. We're going to get our answers next film. These mysteries are to be solved. Now, Abrams, of course, is famous for the whole mystery box structure of storytelling, where the mystery of what will happen drives suspense in the narrative, and it drives action to get to the answers. But it doesn't really matter what the answer is if you present another mystery at the end of that direction.
I find myself drawn to infinite possibility and that sense of potential, and I realize that mystery is the catalyst for imagination. Maybe there are times when mystery is more important than knowledge.
Another mystery, another question. Well, at a certain point, fans got to go, okay, we're going to get the answers to this, right? Right? So when you compare that with a director with a very different style of storytelling, like Rian Johnson, who does not follow the mystery box structure like Abrams does, you're going to get some issues. You're going to rub against each other in a way that's very complicated, because Rian Johnson's style is more deconstructive, self-reflective, metacognitive. For the sake of this video, I'm going to define deconstruction. A lot of people conflate deconstruction with demolition. That is to say, destroying a plot, showing how terrible it is, how foolish it is, etc. But rather, deconstruction is taking the components of narrative apart to see how they function in the greater whole. That is to say, a trope can be taken apart from the rest, analyzed, and it's examined how this trope aids with the progress of a narrative. The way the writing process for these sequels were, it's very well known. It feels like every director was just given a film in a lineup and told, do your own thing. Respond to whatever the guide before you did. And as it turns out, Abrams would be brought back to quote-unquote fix what Rian Johnson did, because Disney panicked when not everyone liked Rian Johnson's vision. But the problem is, Rian Johnson and J.J. Abrams initially were not communicating between what they wanted, so the entire trilogy is disjointed. And Abrams really had no interest in actually answering any of the questions he was setting up, outside the superficial level of it. Rian Johnson, though, did want to give answers. He just had answers that he knew would be devastating to the audience, and chose them deliberately because it would cause the most frustration. It would cause the most pain. Sometimes questions don't have big answers. Sometimes they have sad, small answers that force you to reevaluate things. And through reevaluation, you find bigger, more meaningful ideas. However, the problem is he's working with Bob Iger. He's working with Disney. Disney requires that the audiences are always left happy, wanting more. Time to think, well, that means you might not buy figures or plushies or stuff like that. That's the problem getting an actual director who makes films for adults to work on your Star Wars film. Because Johnson understood a key thing. In order to bring Star Wars to a new generation, you have to break new ground, do something different. Disney doesn't want to break new ground. They want to return to things that are familiar and therefore marketable. So you get these opposing viewpoints. Familiar sells, different is needed. The fact this movie got made is a small miracle. Johnson harkened back to Kurosawa's films, the same director who inspired Lucas back when he made the original film, A New Hope. But while Lucas was inspired by films like The Hidden Fortress or The Seven Samurai, Johnson seems to have lifted more from Kurosawa's more difficult films. When Johnson in The Last Jedi presents the story of how Luke and Kylo Ren had their falling out, it's told with the same cinematic language as Rashomon, a samurai film made by Kurosawa about different viewpoints of the same events. How everyone has a different viewpoint of what happened, and none might be true, but they're true to the person telling it.
You like Rashomon?
That's not how I remember it.
I also believe that Johnson drew heavily from Ran, which was one of the last great films that Kurosawa made. And Ran itself is based on another story. What was it? Why do I feel like this is leading to something? Hey, you know, I'll come back to that. We'll come back to whatever Ran's based on. I'm sure it's something important. Johnson recognized that Star Wars fandom had become too anchored in nostalgia. The Force Awakens launched a culture of fan theories, where everyone needed to figure out what they saw and how it fit into the past, or some lost Legends canon. You know, because a lot of people, again, who is Snoke? Was Snoke Darth Plagueis, the old master of Palpatine?
Did you ever hear the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise?
Was that how this was some kind of big master plan spanning centuries? Though Plagueis had been killed off in the legend novel Darth Plagueis, we were in a new canon now. Anything could happen. And with Legends canon eliminated, this opened the door up to old characters from Legend making their way back. We saw this with Thrawn, for example. So why not Plagueis? Abrams in his two films drew heavily from Legends, especially the Legacy of the Force series and the Dark Empire series. This provided Abrams a set of ideas he could use for his films, which he used, but he ignored how these Legends works existed in a context of many other works. There was a whole history leading up to these works making more sense cohesively with the rest of the story. Abrams took plot points and shoved them in without the context or world building necessary to better incorporate them, and as a result, created something very sloppy. But don't worry, if you couldn't wait for Plagueis, he did show up eventually, and I'm sure everyone loved it. Rian Johnson, by comparison, did not do this. He told an original story. Johnson, you may not realize this if you've only seen Star Wars, but he has a very large filmography of really good films, but they all do something interesting. They play with the established tropes of established genre in order to kind of subvert expectations in a way to create tension and to create a new, unique vantage point through which to see the familiar. While Johnson does ultimately regularly reconstruct the genre within his framework, he often deconstructs it first to show you how each of these pieces might look in a different perspective. Case in point, let's look at Looper. Looper is a time travel film told in the style of Terminator. Like in Terminator, the main character is trying to stop this guy from the future who's coming back from changing the past. In this case, however, he's fighting himself from the future. And what we end up getting is a neo-noir told through a sci-fi lens. It's a lot of these guys are criminals, it's all the mafia and all that. But what ends up happening is, ultimately, is that rather than stop the future man, our past version of the main character realizes that the entire fight itself is causing this loop to start. That by his past self coming back to the past, it traumatizes this young boy, and that young boy becomes a monster in the future, which drives the future self to go back into time. It's a whole loop. So in order to stop the loop from happening, the main character decides to close the loop before it could even begin. And in doing so, changes the future for the better, as he sees it, by destroying a cycle of violence before it can start. It follows the same ideas of the time travel story. However, it inverts it. Rather than the guy from back in the past changing the future, the guy from the past changes the future and stops the loop. It's an inversion of what you typically would expect of this kind of story, where someone would either stop the future man from changing the past, or the future man changes the past, which leads to a different future. It's a very interesting way of doing time travel. Inaction is what drives the action. On the other hand, Knives Out, a fantastic tribute to Agatha Christie cozy mysteries, except you think you're following the killer, who spends the whole movie thinking that she needs to protect herself from the eccentric detective. And we sympathize with her because the rest of the cast is absolutely heinous. Only we realize that she did nothing wrong. And the detective has never been fooled by her attempts to conceal herself from him.
And what you and Harlan did that fateful night seems at first glance to fill that hole perfectly. But we must look a little closer.
It's a bunch of subversions that play into the tropes of the Agatha Christie story, just from a different vantage point. The Last Jedi, the deconstruction comes here.
The greatest teacher failure is.
The heroes and authorities we trust don't always help us, but rather, through trying to help, they might create scenarios where greater evils rise up.
The Jedi are romanticized, deified. But if you strip away the myth and look at their deeds, the legacy of the Jedi is failure.
And believing that you're always right without questioning yourself can be bad. Sometimes failure is necessary for us to learn how to be better, and those who refuse to learn from failure are doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past. A singular strong hero is not enough. A singular strong hero, though, can inspire others to do better.
We are what they grow beyond.
Now, on paper, that's pretty compelling. It's also compelling in the film, but done in a way where it might be a problem for some people who have built Star Wars up to be this grand mythology. It can hurt someone if they are not expecting it to be what it is. The problem is The Last Jedi takes the established story of Star Wars and questions its conventions on a foundational level. Luke is much like Obi-Wan and Yoda before him. He is in exile. They went into exile after a great failure. And audiences expect, like Obi-Wan and Yoda, for Luke to either be on some mission or waiting for a new student to train in order to undermine the rising evil of the dark side. Instead, he is there to end everything. He is there in exile because he feels he deserves to be exiled. He is there to die. See, as much as people like to make fun of George Lucas for structuring Star Wars like poetry where it rhymes,
It's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
audiences like pattern recognition. Familiar structures and formulas are comforting and engaging to us. It's one reason why Joseph Campbell's hero's journey is so revolutionary. It allowed a ton of writers to align their stories more effectively with the structured elements of the monomyth. Rian Johnson is aware of this and deliberately deconstructs the hero journeys with its core characters. Now, Poe wants to rise to action, but rather than have him refuse the call, he is denied the call by both Holdo and Leia. Finn's entire arc is about denying the call of action until the final half of the film. He does not want to be drawn to fight, but he's forced to, and has to learn why he wants to accept the call at all. In Luke's whole arc, for all the good that Luke's journey did, it didn't stop evil forever, and that's disenchanting.
That force does not belong to the Jedi. To say that if the Jedi die, the light dies is vanity. Can you feel that?
Luke only temporarily stopped evil in the moment. He did not have permanent impact on the flow of history, because no single great victory can ever stop evil forever. It just stops the problem right now, but without constant care, evil can reemerge under your nose, and you can even set up the elements through which new evil can be born. But Johnson does not totally toss out the hero's myth. There is one character who follows it, and that is Rey. She adheres to it. She goes off on adventure, changes, is reunited with her father figure, in this case, the disappointing absence of one.
They were nobody.
They were filthy junk traders who sold you off for drinking money. You have no place in this story. You come from nothing. You're nothing.
She confronts her adversaries and returns home with the amulet, skills, understanding, and the Jedi texts necessary to restart the Order anew after Luke's passing.
Yes. Wisdom they held, but that library contained nothing that the girl Rey does not already possess.
Learning from his lessons while also going back to some old traditional elements. Rey's arc is the monomyth, but she is surrounded by people who subvert that arc. Yet in the end, if you look at what Rey does in the film, she still completes that journey. For as much as that structure is criticized, it does not collapse. Even though there are ways to criticize the structure and subvert it, the core still stands.
It's time to let old things die. The Sith, the Jedi, the rebels, let it all die.
Now, people hear the movie where they say, let the past die and all that, but that's not the message of the film. Luke sees the past as a structure that continues to lead to failure.
At the height of their powers, they allowed Darth Sidious to rise, create the Empire, and wipe them out. It was a Jedi Master who was responsible for the training and creation of Darth Vader.
With the mythology established, the Jedi did allow Palpatine to rise to power. They did ignore the Sith rising.
My only conclusion can be that it was a Sith Lord.
Impossible. The Sith have been extinct for a millennium.
So there is failure in the past that Luke recognizes we need to learn from. On the other hand, Kylo Ren feels shackled to his past, either by the legacy of his parents or the legacy of his grandfather, Darth Vader. And so he feels shackled to it and decides to burn everything that reminds him to that down. He decides to destroy the patterns and hierarchies of old to rise beyond them. Further, he also rejects the expectations we have for Kylo Ren. We expect him to be redeemed. Instead, he rejects redemption and becomes worse, taking over the First Order and makes decisions that would, had he not been caught up in the past, led to the end of the Resistance. Come the end of the film, Luke realizes that he was wrong, and that the failures of his past are not a reason to destroy a structure, but rather to build something better moving forward.
I will have killed the Last Jedi!
Amazing. Every word of what you just said was wrong.
Every single master learns that their students are what grows beyond them. Luke Skywalker ultimately sees himself as a remnant of the past, something to inspire change moving forward through sacrifice. Meanwhile, Kylo Ren is so caught up with the past that in order to fight shadows, essentially, he lets his present slip away from him. He's so caught up trying to stop Luke Skywalker, he ends up shadow boxing an illusion Luke creates for him while the heroes escape. An apt metaphor for his arc. So caught up with his anger over the past, he refuses to make good change in the future, and he lets opportunity slip him by. But, audiences are just upset that Luke's a sad old man and not a hero, so arc bad. Forget all the good it does.
This film basically destroys everything that made Luke the iconic hero we all knew and loved. His very essence has been wiped away, the core of his being crushed and demolished, the fire of his accomplishments and struggles and triumphs brutally extinguished. The Last Jedi assassinates Luke Skywalker, both literally and metaphorically. It doesn't just kill him, it destroys the very essence of who he is.
Not every component of the film works, of course. Finn and Rose feel very superfluous to the plot. And with their failures and DJ's betrayal, it makes the Resistance feel more vulnerable during their strategic retreat. It feels less impactful overall, especially when Holdo resolves the conflict of the First Order pursuing them very effectively by just crashing a ship into the other ship at hyperdrive, resulting in one of the coolest visuals in the whole series. I don't care how this works with the lore, it's just cool. There is the fact that Finn, who is set up as the co-lead in the film prior, is reduced to a tertiary character who feels pulled along by the actions of other characters, despite his arc being about him taking the initiative to join the Resistance. In the first film, he makes very few choices that further the plot in the second film. He is railroaded. He is told, go to the casino, find the guy. They get sent to jail by someone else. Then they find another guy, and then they leave. And then they're put in jail. They're following missions and objectives, but Finn rarely chooses the direction they go in. It's usually another character who acts, and the choice is taken away from Finn. He is not an active character, he is a reactive character. Which, considering how, again, he helped drive the plot in the first film, this contrast of more passivity versus active control of the narrative is more apparent. But not everything with Finn is bad necessarily. His relationship with DJ is very interesting, because DJ is a mirror to what political indifference during a war looks like.
Good guys, bad guys, made up words. It's all a machine, partner. Live free, don't join.
DJ is an opportunist, he's a gambler. He helps Finn and Rose out for a bit, but then when a better offer comes, he turns him in and joins the First Order for a little cash. His ethos is perfectly summed up in a scene where he talks about weapons dealers selling to both the First Order and the Resistance. It doesn't matter who they sell to, the dealer still makes money at the end of the day. War is a business. In a business, you make the best deal for yourself and don't care about anything else. It's not personal, it's strictly business. Except, it is personal when people's lives are on the line. DJ treats lives like profit, and indeed, when push comes to shove, he sells out the entire Resistance for a little bit of cash and doesn't even hesitate to walk away with it. He is never held accountable in the films for his actions. He walks out of the film and it's fine. And Finn is left feeling the sense of betrayal. He has felt knowing what it feels like when someone runs out on a cause that you're beginning to care about. He knows now how others might have felt had he abandoned the Resistance. And that's important. That's an element of narrative that's really interesting. And then there's Rose, who I think deserved so much more as a character. Rose Tico's sister dies in the opening fight, which illustrates the human cost of war. We then see her throughout the film observing the way fascism impacts the average person, and how greed and all of that motivates people to do terrible, terrible things. And she presents the idea that fighting is about protecting those that we care about above all else. Again, on paper, a very interesting idea, but the problem is the execution. Rose's dialogue consists almost entirely of speeches, of lectures, and these themes are not organically woven into the narrative through action and visuals, but rather the story stops to present the idea to us. This is made all the more frustrating when you realize the majority of scenes where Rose is talking happen in the casino sequence, a segment of the film that feels completely disconnected from the core plot and is distracting whenever it's back. You always feel a little disconnected from the core conflict, and it deflates tension while here. It's away from the ship that's being pursued by the First Order, it's away from Rey training under Luke. It just feels so far removed, it almost feels like he took Finn and Rose and just dumped them on some random Harry Potter-esque world. And yeah, Star Wars is not subtle about its ideas, not at all. But this feels very much like the character existing as a mouthpiece, more than as a person. She communicates more to the audience with her intro, where she's quietly crying over her lost sister, more than in any of the monologue she gives later on, because that's organically woven in. We get more sense of how war impacts people through that than we ever do with any of her dialogue. And none of that has to do with John Boyega, Benicio del Toro, or Kelly Marie Tran, all of whom elevate the underdeveloped writing to as high a level as possible. It's just a shame they gave Finn the same arc as he got in The Force Awakens, where he runs away, rejoins the Resistance, and becomes a hero. Self-sacrifice to protect someone he loves. Like, I know Star Wars is like poetry and rhymes, but
It's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
This isn't rhyming, it's just a fading echo. You can't do the same thing so many times before it becomes redundant. Now this is opposed to Poe, who goes from a very static character in the first film to a more developed one with an arc. A lot of audiences sympathize with Poe early on. He's a fighter pilot. He fights for the Resistance against the First Order. He's a hero, a hotshot, someone who is fiery-tempered but always gets the job done correctly. And in the first film, he is just a really good, cool guy who really loves his friend Finn. Yeah, friendship. That's what they're calling it nowadays.
Yeah, and so far it's been more of a subtextual kind of maybe romantic relationship with Finn a bit.
And they get upset with Holdo in this film because Holdo tells Poe, "Hey, you can't do what you're doing. Yeah, stop. You're a loose cannon. You gotta chill out." But what Holdo does makes total sense. Poe is reckless. While some of his actions do benefit the Resistance, they often have a high cost of life. He constantly attacks when he needs to consider tactical escapes and solutions in order to keep people alive. He is a man with good intentions who makes for a good fighter, but he is not a great soldier, and he's certainly not at this point a great leader. Holdo, why would she trust this guy with anything, you know? He doesn't listen to orders. If she trusts him with a plan, it's very likely that he'll just run off and do it without waiting for the right time or doing something that might hurt someone. As far as she's concerned, Poe would cause disruption to a plan designed to save lives. And he does. Holdo's plan would have worked if Poe didn't send Finn and Rose off to get like a code breaker or whatever. We see at the end of the film that Poe is finally learning to be responsible after seeing what Holdo planned and how he impeded Holdo's plan. He learns from failure.
The greatest teacher, failure is.
This is actually a really good arc that sets him up for a commander role, or something in the next film, like, Misato Katsuragi from Evangelion, a character who is unhinged, but has a loyalty to those under her command, who does the right thing. Poe could have been a real good commander. Oh wait, they don't do that. They bring him back to the hotshot pilot next film, because it's easier to shoot in film, because it has more direct action, and it's less complicated. Right, of course. The big issue with Finn, Poe, and Rose is that their arcs barely matter in the rise of Skywalker. Finn gets out the best, I think, of the three, because he finds community with other stormtroopers who left the First Order, and he's able to process his experience culturally. There are hints that he might be a Jedi or be Force sensitive. And that's all well and good, but it picks up directly after where The Force Awakens left off, because he wasn't given much of an arc in the Rise of Skywalker. That wasn't already redundant to what came before. Now, Poe is presented more as a rogue. Again, the hotshot pilot. He's not given a chance to be a leader too much outside of the third act. He's more just himself, like in the previous two films. And Rose is barely there. They completely drop the character because of the massive backlash against her, because she committed the cardinal sin of existing. The only arcs that really carry through effectively to the Rise of Skywalker is Kylo Ren's arc and Rey's arc, who basically become the only characters who matter in the Rise of Skywalker. What was once an ensemble piece becomes just Kylo Ren's extended redemption and Rey's reconciliation with her past. And speaking of which, Rey's past was a mystery set up in The Force Awakens. Her parents seemingly abandoned her on Jakku, And fans speculated, oh, maybe Rey's parents were someone of note. Maybe she's a child of someone we know already. The prequels tied a lot of characters in with the lore to someone else from the past. So they would know someone else. It became a very small galaxy where a couple family lines and a couple people were really instrumental in guiding the direction of this whole galaxy. It felt very small, but also interwoven a little too much. People kept showing up, even though it's a massive galaxy full of potential. So it felt like the Skywalkers were the only ones who inspired change, or Obi-Wan Kenobi, or Yoda, or Palpatine. And if you weren't tied in with those events, then, well, what are you going to do? Leia's whole ancestry was tied up with Naboo, and with Anakin, and with Obi-Wan for years. It's a whole thing. Rey desperately wants to figure out how she fits into this sense of legacy, into this network of people who had influence throughout the decades. So Rian Johnson found the most devastating potential answer for Rey. She doesn't fit in.
You have no place in this story. You come from nothing. You're nothing.
She's no one's child. She's not destined for greatness. Her family meant nothing in the scheme of things. And yet, despite that, more than any of these other destined heroes, she chooses to be someone great. More than Luke, more than Kylo Ren, more than Han Solo, Rey takes the initiative and becomes great despite there being no destiny. She is diametrically opposed to Kylo Ren, who is all the destiny. He is the destined son. He is the interconnection of all these different families. He is the grandson of Darth Vader, the nephew of Luke, the son of Leia, the son of Han Solo. He feels destined to have all the future fates, but he's equal to Rey. They're balanced. And that's interesting. That shows that you can be a hero, you can be noteworthy, and have ties to nothing. You could just come out of nothing and be a hero. Anyone can be a hero. Oh wait, no, Rey's the granddaughter of Palpatine.
You're his granddaughter. You are a Palpatine.
Oops. Oh, I guess everything's connected now. Now it just makes sense. Oh, why is Rey balanced with Kylo Ren? Well, it's because, she's a Palpatine. They're destined. It's the bloodlines. It's special bloodlines. If you can't do anything good if you're not married to if you're not born from the right person. It's all 5 families throughout the history of Star Wars, changing everything. And I really hate this. I cannot stand this decision. Because it takes one of the most devastating ideas, that Rey is nothing. Everything Rey wanted to learn, it turned out not to be the case. She's disappointed beyond measure. But that's compelling. That's interesting. That is a conflict. That's an answer to the questions established that is tough. And people didn't like the answer, but it's a tough answer. I really like this decision. I don't like the decision to make Rey just another part of the larger legacy. Make her a newcomer who's able to bring real change forward. Otherwise, it feels stagnant. It feels like we can't escape the characters established in the original film and prequels. We can't move forward. We are always shackled to the past. We can't let the past die. We can't learn to move beyond it. And I think that's the key reason why a lot of people who watched The Last Jedi and praised it initially maybe turn on the film, because the follow-through sucked. Where there was once a door opening new stories, we realized beyond that door was just the same stories. Again, the safe ones. If The Last Jedi is a deconstruction, The Rise of Skywalker is a hasty rebuild of what came before, right down to somehow Palpatine returning, because that's what we want, right? A retread of the Dark Empire story, a comic that was itself kind of ripping off Ghostbusters 2. You know what I'm saying? Like it's just repetitive. And hot take, I'm glad Rian Johnson killed Snoke off. Snoke sucks. Snoke is a boring antagonist who wants to copy the Emperor. He's ultimately barely responsible for anything that happens in The Force Awakens, but people theorized about who he was because the promise of something better was more appealing than who Snoke was on screen. Was he a hidden Sith? Was he Plagueis? Was he something else? Everyone wanted Snoke to be something other than what he actually was. Because what he was just some distant guy who led Kylo Ren down the path of darkness, who delegated all the hard work of running the First Order to the minions in front of the camera. There was nothing left. What Rian Johnson saw was that Snoke's most interesting characteristics were his drive to destroy the Jedi Order, and thus Luke Skywalker, and how he inspired Kylo Ren to be worse. I mean, he's not even a good teacher. He didn't even finish Kylo Ren's training. Look at the end of the last film. It's time to complete Kylo Ren's training. Well, why didn't you complete it before you send him out on war missions to fight Luke? Snoke is powerful, but he's also arrogant. and he's proved that the puppet master villains like Palpatine are always one flub away from getting killed like a little loser. I would compare Snoke's fate to the fate that awaited Tywin Lannister in Game of Thrones, except unlike Tywin, Snoke doesn't actually do anything all that interesting directly. He barely has any chessmaster plans. His position is very poorly fortified. He does very little to further his agenda on screen, and as a result, he doesn't even come across as a competent chessmaster because we don't really see him playing any chess. Rey comes to the First Order deliberately to help change Kylo Ren, and while Snoke takes credit for this, I mean, like, it was gonna happen anyway. He didn't have to do all that much. He's kind of just there. He facilitates change in other characters, but he himself is not much of a character at all. I mean, he's just hanging out there in a golden bathrobe half the movie, for crying out loud. I mean, how is this Bob Guccione-coded guy going to be threatening in any way whatsoever? I mean, come on. It's an inversion of Vader's betrayal, where he did one good thing after being an evil monster for decades and became a good guy. But Kylo Ren now is free to be as terrible as he wants, to be in charge. Snoke's plans ultimately lead to Kylo Ren becoming an unhinged monster. And the Jedi Order, ironically, survives through Rey, because Snoke's pupil, Kylo Ren, is too uncontrollable to get the specific missions accomplished. The plan unravels because it worked too well. But no, because Snoke was just a pawn of Palpatine, who was the real puppet master the whole time, it turns out none of this was a plan going out of control. It was just all part of Palpatine's plan. And Kylo Ren isn't worse. He's just a pawn who kind of starts to feel bad about all the evil things he does, like killing his dad and opening war against his mother and considering killing her a few times. You know, and again, all the open doors that Johnson set up by getting rid of Snoke, by opening up this idea that this kid can be driven to evil and be this uncontrollable monster that needs to be stopped, that's totally gone. Unimportant. They went with the predictable, easy solution. And look, audiences like the familiar. They like to see what comes before and see it come again. But the problem is that it wasn't good. You know, it just was the same old thing again. What's funny is, I wonder if there's any other work in the past that took a past story or structure and just deconstructed it, did something a little different, tried something different, and then audiences also rejected it too, because it was unfamiliar. That wasn't what they wanted. I wonder if that's ever happened before. Has it happened before?
'Tis our past intent to shake all cares and business from our age, conferring them on younger strengths, while we, unburdened, crawl toward death.
So, confession time. I may have tricked you. Because this video wasn't originally about Star Wars at all. No. No, you fool. See, I tricked you. And now that you're here, with this much time left in the video, you can't leave because of the sunk time fallacy. So now you're stuck here with me as I tell you about the video's actual micro-obsession. Shakespeare. Shakespeare. Shakespeare and Star Wars have a long history together, even ignoring those books that are basically just, what if Star Wars was written by the bard with these and thereles? The books and the films have a lot in common. The tragedy of Darth Vader is very similar to other great tragedies Shakespeare wrote in many senses of the words, but the Star Wars cycle is in particular remarkably like the histories of Shakespeare. The lesser, I mean, everyone knows Shakespeare's comedies and Shakespeare's tragedies, but his histories are slightly less well known. Across 8 different plays, Shakespeare maps the rise and fall of great English kings, with great wars between England and France from within the kingdom itself, where villains rise to power using political and social manipulation. And remarkably, the histories, like the Star Wars trilogies, can be subdivided into particular sagas. For the sake of discussion, we're going to ignore King John and King Henry VIII, because they fit before and after the chronology I'm about to discuss. Richard II, Henry IV Parts 1 and 2, and Henry V form a singular narrative detailing the rise of Henry V, a king who would eventually defeat the French during the 100-Year War. It also outlines how various forces put an end to the quote-unquote merry old England of old, with the plump knight Falstaff being a representative of this carefree era of non-malicious mischief.
I speak to thee, my heart. I know thee not, old man.
The second part of the histories, which is actually written before the prequel set of histories, isn't that funny how that works out, consists of Henry VI, Part 1, 2, 3, and Richard III, which focuses on the end of the 100-Year War, the War of the Roses, and the conclusion where a villain emerges at the end of the war to seize power. That being, of course, the famous Richard III.
And therefore, since I cannot prove a lover, I'm determined to prove a villain and hate the idle pleasures of these days.
See, in this sense, you can see a lot of elements inherent in Star Wars also present in Shakespeare's more beloved plays. But these plays follow a cosmic structure. Order is restored with the crowning of the rightful king, mainly because Queen Elizabeth or King James were the ones funding Shakespeare's plays. So if the hierarchy that led to them getting into power didn't get crowned and weren't the heroes of the story, there might be a bit of a problem there with funding for the next week's play. But Shakespeare's plays are very classical. The crowning of the rightful king puts an end to many of the problems within many of Shakespeare's plays. There are bad kings and there are good kings, and a good king coming to power restores general order. Now this feels at odds with The Last Jedi, of course. That's a story where the old order causes problems, and the traditional structure of the galaxy far, far away is criticized for allowing these evils to come to power. It's a deconstruction. And so there's surely not any Shakespeare play about kings and power structures. What Shakespeare's play would deal with the folly of a hierarchy collapsing upon itself as it's abused by... It's King Lear. The answer is King Lear. King Lear is the play that I'm referencing here. From a quality standpoint, obviously, King Lear is regarded as one of Shakespeare's greatest works of literature today. It's the inspiration for that Akira Kurosawa film, Rian, I mentioned earlier. But the reception to King Lear was so widely negative when it debuted that for literally centuries, the original text was not performed. A version that changed the ending was played. So why? Why was it so widely rejected?
Nothing will come of nothing. Speak again.
King Lear is about a king named Lear, obviously, who divides his kingdom into 3 for each of his daughters. He surrenders his titles and authority, but expects to maintain his power. He expects his daughters to just take care of him while he enjoys early retirement, making merry and having fun. Only one of his daughters, Cordelia, tells him that this idea is ridiculous. Lear renounces her for it. Now, as you can imagine though, he probably should listen to her because things go badly for Lear after this. This story is based on a story from Geoffrey of Monmouth's History of the Kings of Britain, the same text responsible for a ton of Arthurian legend. Lear supposedly reigned before the Roman Empire, which, it should tell you the story was heavily fictionalized because France and Burgundy and all that are already present in this version of King Lear when they were created for many, many centuries later. Now, in the original text, Lear, after being betrayed by his daughters, seeks Cordelia out in France, where she has married the king there. Again, a sign this isn't really based in history if it's pre-Roman Empire, but I digress. Lear and Cordelia raise an army and take Britain back, restoring Lear to his rightful throne. The mighty Lear reigns for a few years more, but when he finally does expire, the throne is given to his daughter Cordelia, who is rewarded for her loyalty with being a fair and just queen. Now, Shakespeare's play does not end like that. Much like in the original story, Lear is also cast out, but this time into a storm. And there, wallowing in the heavy rain and cold, he loses his mind and succumbs to madness. Cordelia brings an army from France on her own to save her father, and manages to briefly reconcile with her dad before they are captured by Lear's eldest 2 daughters and Edmund, the play's actual villain, who is actually not present in the original narrative. He's a Shakespeare creation. Edmund, in order to gain the throne, enacts a scheme where he convinces the daughters of Lear to fall madly in love with him, to the point where they'd kill their rival sister out of jealousy. Both sisters die, but to secure his line, Edmund needs to kill Lear and the final daughter, Cordelia. He sends an assassin to kill the 2 after they're captured in a battle. Now, Edmund is actually beaten in battle. His half-brother comes and beats him in a fight, and Edmund, at the end of his life, tries to repent for his sins by warning them of the assassin, by trying to call it off, but it's not enough. Cordelia is slain and bleeds out in King Lear's arms, who is driven back into madness and dies sobbing over his dead daughter's corpse.
Why should a dog, a horse, a rat have life, and thou no breath at all?
Shakespeare made Cordelia arguably more deserving of her happy ending. With her leading the army without her father asking for aid, she takes initiative more. She's a stronger, well-written female lead with a pure heart. And it doesn't matter. She still dies. Lear is a mighty king, a warrior who fights back and takes what he needs to rule in the original text. But in the play, he dies without a single sword striking him down because he is attacked emotionally. The injury is not physical, but on the soul itself, which casts away any doubt that this world could ever be a good and loving place. Sound familiar?
By the time I realized I was no match for the darkness rising in him, it was too late. The temple was burning. I failed.
Audiences hated this. Poem Nahum Tate revised the play a few decades after Shakespeare's death to change the ending. The original play was not put on again for over 150 years following Shakespeare's death. And even then, Lear was reviled until the end of the World Wars, because audiences only then were ready to embrace a work as bleak as the one around them. The revised ending to Lear completely compromised Shakespeare's original work, siphoning out the intense ideas of the original. That titles are meaningless in the face of true power, that old men must be wise before they grow old, unless they want to watch their children die unfair, cruel deaths. The decision to change King Lear's ending robbed it of all merit, of all power, of all messaging. It created a message that said nothing, and nothing can come of nothing. Wow, I wonder if that happened again after this, where creatives, in order to placate an angry audience, just gave people what they wanted, just tossed out the emotional, tough endings of their works, and just placed in a happy ending to let the crowds walk away glad and smiling. Sure, glad that doesn't happen ever, right?
Somehow Palpatine returned.
Nothing in The Last Jedi is as bleak as King Lear. In fact, it's a fairly optimistic story where hope is renewed by its end. But fans of Star Wars, like the audiences of Shakespeare's day, perceive both The Last Jedi and King Lear as a depressing betrayal of their childhood fantasies, of heroes who deserve to be seen heroically and not as failures who go mad in exile and never actually fight anyone, dying from injuries that are not inflicted by a blade. Luke Skywalker, however, is given far more dignity in death than Lear ever was. The various characters are sent on journeys separate from each other, as is the case in Lear. In The Last Jedi, the characters fail, but they learn from failure. It's the greatest teacher. In King Lear, however, they fail, learn their lessons seconds prior to dying, if there is a lesson to be learned at all. Because sometimes they didn't do anything wrong. Someone else did, and they suffered for it. Ultimately, the fans do not want anything from Star Wars that breaks outside the established material of the past. Much like how audiences did not want King Lear to be different from their historical, quote-unquote, version of King Lear. And Disney responded by giving fans exactly what they wanted. Tons of callbacks to past stuff. And the fans complained about every new edition because, much like with the safe version of King Lear, it was stagnant, safe, and ultimately robbed of any of the meaning the original text had. Now, is all of Star Wars and the Disney underwhelming? God, no. Andor stands apart because it's an exceptional sci-fi series. But even looking at the reaction to Andor from established big-name Star Wars fans, they're complaining about screws in the wall.
It's just whatever. It's honestly a kind of a forgettable show. Look, acting was great. Cinematography was great. The writing was good. But it was a lot of little things. I mean, when we saw the camera in the previous episode, there were like screws in the wall. When we see certain architecture, it's just bricks. You know, it's not smooth stone or sandstone or whatever it might be that was in the prequels or the originals, which kind of gives you the feel of Star Wars. The whole thing about Star Wars is to feel like it's from a galaxy far, far away. It didn't do that with this one.
Like acting like Vader, the monster who killed children, would see sexual violation as a step too far.
And as a result of this scene, there was a discourse created around whether or not, as I said, Star Wars should depict this. And it has mainly galvanized around a tweet created by YouTuber Star Wars Theory, who I have many, many thoughts on, none very positive. But in his tweet, he said, "SA in Star Wars feels unnecessary. You can portray power dynamics and make the audience hate the Empire in other ways without taking it to such a disgusting place. Vader wouldn't tolerate that shit, nor does the Empire condone it. It has no place in Star Wars, period. Unnecessary." There's a few things that are kind of ridiculous right on its face. I mean, his first thing says that he says is Vader wouldn't tolerate that shit, nor does the Empire condone it. And it just goes to show his kind of ignorance of how these systems would actually work. Why would Vader give a crap what some guy on some backwater planet on a power trip is going to do?
No, he wouldn't, because real-world monsters and real-world fascists and real-world dictators did worse than this in real life. Do you really think Vader would care? This is a realistic depiction of the Empire, an uncompromising vision. But fans want to see their storybook land. They want to see evil that is safe. You know, evil that's not too evil. Evil that's cool and we can, like, dress up as stormtroopers as a costume for Halloween, not be reminded of real-world horror in the process. Which is why Andor is such a challenging series. And challenging in Star Wars doesn't always seem to work for the audiences because they want their playbox. They want their fun. You can't have fun when you're being reminded of real life. And for better or worse, some fans can't stand the idea of having both a realistic, grim narrative and a fun adventure. If you see the immature way people react to maturity in Andor, you can see the core problem. Star Wars cannot change because it is not allowed to mature or grow. It needs to bait nostalgia. Now, one of the best recent Star Wars projects, other than Andor or The Mandalorian, is The Skeleton Crew, a series that's part Treasure Island and The Goonies, just set in the Star Wars universe. And it harkens back to the Amblin style of filmmaking, you know, Steven Spielberg in the 80s, where it has a whole sense of family and well-written characters and a sense of wonder and adventure balanced with simple joys and terrors. And it does a great job telling a self-contained, simple story. And I feel like some Star Wars fans struggle to articulate their thoughts on Skeleton Crew. Because when they saw it, they knew it was a cute show for families, but because they couldn't feed off the negativity around it, they kind of just fell back on complaining about The Acolyte. Look at Star Wars Theory's review of it.
I think that this show is quite adorable. It's got a good message of, you know, fighting for your friends, fighting for what you believe in, dare to dream big, you know, like Wim dreaming of being a Jedi. And, you know, it's got adventure and, you know, trusting your gut instincts and knowing that not everybody is out there is good and a lot of them are trying to squeeze you for what they can get out of you.
He talks for a little bit about how the show is charming and cute, but then suddenly, whenever he gets a chance, cuts right back to saying, well, you remember how bad The Acolyte was? That definitely poisoned the well with the Skeleton Crew.
And I think that they set this up for a season 2. I think what they're scoping is if this show has enough ratings or not. And sadly, because of the power, it doesn't have the ratings. It has the worst ratings of any Star Wars, apparently, from what we've seen in reports. The worst ratings of any Star Wars show, which is sad because I liked the show. Thought it was fun. Thought it was lighthearted. It was cute. It didn't destroy any lore. It didn't bastardize any characters. It didn't bring anyone back from the dead or before there were even a nut in their daddy's sack. Ki-Adi Mundi. Didn't have any weird cave dwellers, and it didn't have any strange ideas of, you know, some guy kidnapping someone and then taking them off to an island and having some weird sexual innuendos.
This is where the fun begins.
It was a very pure kids show with Star Wars themes. You know, it's really unfortunate that The Acolyte did what it did and alienated more fans from the franchise, because I guarantee you, and I would put my channel on this, if this show came out after Rogue One, there would be a lot more people interested to at least give it a shot. Give it a chance. This, for me, was more interesting than Solo. I like this more than Solo. We don't need anything political or any weird shit like that going in there, like The Acolyte. Just a fun little story. No big deal. Don't think about it too much. At least that's better than the things that came prior.
He's struggling to pivot to something negative because he wants something to criticize. And it ends up being, doesn't it suck that The Acolyte sank Star Wars reps so badly no one wants to see Skeleton Crew? And not like, oh, Disney barely marketed this show, and that's why maybe audiences aren't watching it. Hell, maybe even say, hey, fans, show this, watch this. It's good stuff. Let's reward material that we like with our viewership. Oh, and buy my lightsabers too, I guess. That's what he wants to say. I don't know Star Wars theory. I guess he sells a lot of lightsabers. I mean, they look pretty cool. I'm not going to lie. They look like good. Has anyone bought Star Wars Theory's lightsabers? Are they good? I'm sure they are. I'm not going to... Listen, you got to get your bag somehow, man. I'm not going to criticize your business. I mean, they look pretty neat. I think the problem is that modern Star Wars culture and discussion has become so focused on negativity that when we see something good and see something that we can't criticize in any meaningful way, we don't know what to do with it. I mean, I know what to do with it. I'll praise it to the heavens and back, but a lot of these big name fans, they seem to feed off negativity, and they're like, wow, something good. I don't know what to say about this, and again, if all you can say is it's not this garbage thing that everyone wanted to hear me talk about before, then maybe you're doing this for the wrong reasons, I don't know. Whenever I hear certain fans criticizing Star Wars, I feel like it's a superficial criticism. The lore doesn't match up quite nicely. Ki-Adi-Mundi, the alien no one cared about, who's born a few centuries earlier or whatever, because that really is what makes or breaks a show. It just feels like, I think back to as a horror fan with Halloween 3. Halloween 3 was a sequel that completely defied expectations by being completely disconnected from the established lore that came before and after. Imagine if Star Wars fans got their Halloween 3. Like the next film, it's about teenagers in the modern era, like a Black Mirror episode. They'd be pissed off. And honestly, Halloween fans are pissed off. It took them many years before they re-embraced Halloween 3 as an interesting novelty. I think that if Star Wars fans got their Halloween 3, they'd have a similar reaction. Disbelief, gradual hatred, gradual revilement, but eventually they'll accept it. You see a pattern here with all this, by the way? King Lear, Halloween 3. You get the idea? By the way, if you want to hear my thoughts on Ki-Adi-Mundi, I did a video on The Acolyte. I go into detail there. I'm not going to get sidetracked on this video talking about the ridiculousness of changing a non-canon event for the new canon, so go for that. Rian Johnson's visions for The Last Jedi is imperfect. I don't think that The Last Jedi is Rian Johnson's best film by any means. But I do think it's an important film in the structure of the fandom culture because it pushed fans a little further than they were comfortable with. They wanted things not to change and were confronted with a lot of change really quickly, and changes that made them uncomfortable with their established lore.
Making matters more complicated is the fact that the Legends canon depicts a version of Luke completely different than the one we saw in The Last Jedi. Much like King Lear with his Histories of the Kings of Britain version, the version of Luke in Legends is a dashing hero. That scene in The Mandalorian that fans went wild over, that's Luke throughout the Legends canon, and I think fans wanted that version on screen. But the problem is, that version of Luke was created for a much younger version of the character. The Last Jedi is a significantly older version of Luke. Now, of course, Legends canon is a mismatched, massive sprawl of different works from different creators.
It's my opinion that the Crystal Star in particular is one of the worst Star Wars things ever created.
But fans had this very rose-tinted glasses vision of the Legends canon, one that drove criticism moving forward.
I've been a fan of the expanded universe, what's now known as Legends, for a long time. I've always loved reading, so in a lot of ways, reading the books, especially the New Jedi Order, was a bigger part of my experience growing up as a Star Wars fan than even the movies. But over the last few years, there's been an increasing phenomenon of people trying to kind of weaponize Legends. Basically, there's a bunch of people who express being a Legends fan just as a way to say that the new canon sucks. And the thing is, they almost always get Legends completely wrong. If you like Legends and dislike canon, more power to you, and the same about the reverse. You do you. What I don't like is people trying to weaponize something I enjoy as a way to attack others for enjoying something else, especially when they seem to often have no idea what they're talking about. Among these claims about Legends are things like it being apolitical, despite, for example, the New Jedi Order being almost 24 books about not being shit to refugees, and about reaching cultural understanding, albeit in ways that very much reflect the time they were written in. Or just Timothy Zahn's comments that Outbound Flight allowed him to write about the Iraq War without actually using the word Iraq. Not recognizing the political context of something isn't the same as that thing being apolitical.
To make matters worse, the idea that there was this alternate version where Luke is a hero, is the savior, you can use that to further criticize the modern version of Star Wars, to act like it rivals the canon you grew up with. In this sense, Luke and Luke become competing visions of the same character.
They felt like it was contradicting what came before. There was a betrayal to what came before. When in actuality, it was a discussion of what came before. But the answers that were selected were the harshest answers possible to the questions being posed.
I mean, I definitely had fun playing a particularly challenging game of Spot the White Guy with this trailer, because damn man, this one shows enough to fulfill Disney's entire DEI quota for the next 2 fiscal years. For example, check out this collection of Jedi Padawans and see if you can identify the one demographic that's mysteriously left out.
Star Wars fans historically have an issue when things have to change, but even more concerning, they have a bit of an issue with other things. Keep in mind, I could get into right now all the stuff with Moses Ingram, Amanda Stanberg, and all of that healthy discourse about the Acolyte and Obi-Wan show. I can talk about the treatment that Kelly Marie Tran received. I can talk about John Boyega's recent comments that received tons of backlash from certain members of the so-called fandom menace. Moses Ingram, by the way, was the best part of the Obi-Wan show, which I don't think was that good, but Moses Ingram's character, Reva, had an interesting arc. It was tragic. And all the things people were complaining about at episode 1 and 2 turned out to be deliberate subversions of expectations. People who said, oh, she's so powerful, how can she beat an Inquisitor? Well, turned out she didn't. It was just a trap. Because she was never as powerful as she thought she was. Vader just wanted to lure her into a false sense of security. That was a thing that Vader did. You know, and again, all these complaints that were made early on, they're made redundant by the time you finish because, hey, maybe there's a plan in place, and if you talk too quickly, you might, forget something.
But let's also be fair, this is taking the idea that all the criticism about Moses Ingram's character are in good faith, which they are not.
Kelly Marie Tran, I think especially, deserves an apology. She was harassed for so long by Star Wars fans for playing a character in The Last Jedi. She received a lot of backlash. And if you say that none of the backlash to these actresses was racist...
Before the film came out, there was unending praise for this fat Asian bitch, because apparently being the first fat Asian bitch in a Star Wars movie means you're automatically a good actress and have a pivotal role.
We are then cursed to meet a new character for the series, Shrek.
A potato in a wig.
Fat Asian is called Rose, and she is the new Jar Jar Binks of this story.
Shrek has this suddenly dramatic and harrowing tale to tell about this casino planet being filled with a bunch of evil white males who made money from being evil and nasty to all of the cute and helpless nice minorities in the world, just in case you couldn't pick that up yourselves.
The fuck are you gonna save the ones you love if you've let the enemy kill everyone, you stupid bitch?
This couldn't be any more poetically fucking retarded. What you said about love makes no fucking sense at all. God fucking damn it.
I dearly hoped that she would die.
Please be dead, please be dead, please be dead. Damn it!
Shrek didn't even have the decency to fucking die.
Obviously, there are a lot of people who felt this way, and they're tired of being called sexist or being labeled as anti-women, because that's completely unfair.
Like, I'm not saying like all of you were. I'm sure some of you have legitimate complaints. Maybe. But are you really gonna tell me that not a single person was... Give me a break here, man. Yeah, let's be honest. I also find it very funny how so many of these critics try to paint Holdo as this queer character.
What the f*** was with her purple hair? She looks like she just came out of an LGBT meeting.
I got the impression that Leia may have had a bisexual relationship with Holdo. The way they gaze into each other's eyes and hold each other's hands just a little bit too long.
So anyway, her plan is to fly in a straight line for 18 hours, which is the only thing she ever does that's straight.
When there's another actor in all of Holdo's scenes who's deliberately trying to add gay subtext and has admitted to it multiple times in interviews.
Really, there could have been a very interesting
forward-thinking, or not even forward-thinking, just like current-thinking love story there. You know, it's something that hadn't quite been explored yet, particularly the dynamic between these two men in war who had fallen in love with each other. The Disney overlords were not ready to do that.
And they kind of neglect that obvious point whether they could make a joke or something, but they missed the obvious joke for the, you know, the hair, I guess. I don't know.
This purple-haired lady is Holdo, who looks like she's about to hold an intersectional lecture on modern Afrocentric feminism rather than command a fleet of rebel soldiers, but Leia gets knocked the out, so the liberal arts major is up to bat.
And look, part of me would love to see John Boyega and Kelly Marie Tran and, you know, Oscar Isaac come back to fulfill the missed potential of their characters. But I also gotta ask, why would they want to? Why would they want to subject themselves to an audience who will reject anything you do when you can work on projects that actually matter?
It was recently reported that Mikey Madison, the recent Best Leading Actress Oscar winner for Anora, was given the opportunity to play in Star Wars Starfighter alongside Ryan Gosling, and she turned it down.
And to that I say, choose anything else, you know? Don't waste your time on Star Wars. Do a project that means something to you. This is, I mean, granted, if they pay you a lot of money, do it. In fact, Disney, pay those actors money so they can come back, because I'd like to see them do more, but even still, why would you want to, you know?
Side note, by the way, if anyone is going to beat Demi Moore for that Oscar, I'm okay that it's Mikey Madison, but you know, Demi Moore really deserved to win that one for The Substance. That movie was absolutely fantastic.
Rian Johnson came in with a vision that was very controversial, but he had a vision. A lot of the recent Star Wars products, and I say products very specifically here, are not made with vision other than to continue telling stories about Star Wars. A lot of people said with Luke that he was defying the ideal of the hero, that this was a betrayal to what heroes do and all that. But I would say you may be misinterpreting something, because Luke's fall in the Last Jedi is honestly a lot like a lot of other great heroes fall eventually. King Lear we use as an example, but you want another one? King Arthur. Yeah, Arthur declines in the latter portions of Le Morte d'Arthur.
Following both the betrayal of Lancelot and Guinevere and the conception of Mordred, King Arthur falls into a despair that brings Camelot down with him. It's only thanks to Percival retrieving the Holy Grail that Arthur is able to return to his throne and regain power, and only rises to fight his final battle against his son Mordred. When they fight, however, they both die in battle. His death marks the end of the old era of kings and opens the world up to a new era, divorced of Camelot's order, for better or for worse. Much like how Luke's death opens up the door to an era past the old universe of Jedi, with a new level of teaching and a new order on the horizon. King Lear's passing leaves the future unclear as well. Luke's passing leaves everything unclear. Johnson did this so future storytellers wouldn't be shackled by George Lucas's legacy. Make your own stories. You're open now to tell free, new, original ideas. To those, of course, who say that Luke is useless or totally unwilling to help, that's not true. Luke is incredibly wise in this film. He's cynical, yeah, but he has an experience and understanding of the Force that shows he has spent a lot of time thinking about his role in the world.
That Force does not belong to the Jedi. To say that if the Jedi die, the light dies is vanity. Can you feel that?
And indeed understands the impact that one man can have, what his limits are.
But you saw there was conflict inside him. You believed that he wasn't gone, that he could be turned.
And I became a legend. I failed because I was Luke Skywalker. Jedi Master, a legend.
But fans did not want to see Luke in his twilight years. They wanted to see him in his prime. That's not the story being told in Last Jedi, though. That story being told in stuff like The Mandalorian, and they love that, because they want to see their hero still be a badass. But you know, how realistic is that? All the actors are aging. You could recast, certainly, but Disney would rather keep the original actors in to profit off them as long as possible. If you ask me, I do think, though, that the Disney era of Star Wars has had some problems. And so, to get an idea of what fans are saying, I decided to watch a couple different video responses to The Last Jedi to get a sense of what they're saying directly. One thing I noticed when watching a bunch of these reactions to Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi, I couldn't help but draw a comparison to another highly controversial film. At the beginning of this video, I made a joke that The Last Jedi was the most controversial film since The Last Temptation of Christ. But the more I watched these reactions to people being upset with how Luke was depicted, the more the comparison felt like it had some weight behind it.
Luke is treated with the utmost disrespect. I have never seen a character so humiliatingly eviscerated in my life.
This is betraying the biblical Jesus, the historical Christ of the scriptures.
A movie that successfully eliminated Luke Skywalker as a credible legacy character by turning him into a weak, bitter, cynical, indecisive old man who gets easily defeated at the hands of his supposed apprentice.
It may convert a lot of people because it is not the Christ, it is not the real Christ.
The Last Temptation of Christ is, of course, a film by Martin Scorsese, based on the novel of the same name. It depicts Jesus Christ as more human than divine, confronting more human issues during his mission on Earth. But it leads with Christ being tempted in every way by Satan, including a vision of the world where he can just retire as the Messiah.
All the pain, that was real.
Yes, but there won't be any more. You've done enough.
Where he can raise a family, grow old. It's meant as one last temptation to keep him from sacrificing himself on the cross. And religious institutions and people hated this depiction of Jesus, in no small part because it depicted Jesus, shall we say, taking a wife and producing a family. You get what I'm trying to say. People were very outraged to the point where theaters were threatened. It was bad. It was really, really bad. I cannot overstate this. But the level of reaction I'm seeing to Luke Skywalker's depiction is very similar. People are upset that their vision of Luke is different than what The Last Jedi did, much like how audiences were upset that The Last Temptation of Christ's depiction of Christ contradicted their religious image of Jesus. And while it might seem really tone-deaf to compare Luke Skywalker to, the founder of a major religion, it's hard not to draw the comparison.
Not only did it turn one of the most beloved and profitable IPs in the history of cinema into a divisive, embarrassing train wreck of biblical proportions, but it also manages to utterly destroy one of the greatest characters of all time.
People are upset that this version contradicts the version in their sacred texts, in this case, the Legends canon, the original film. And this, of course, ignores that Luke in that first trilogy of films was a flawed hero.
But I was going into Toshi Station to pick up some power converters.
It's not that I like the Empire, I hate it, but there's nothing I can do about it right now.
He started off whiny. He was impulsive, led to decisions based on the needs of his friends in the moment. And even in The Return of the Jedi, when he is at his full power, he still succumbs to rage when pushed. What would make him go into exile? Well, the feeling of crushing responsibility that you are responsible for a fascist dictatorship to rise up. The guilt of knowing that war is on your hands, that you are the instrument through which this new terror originated from. Yeah, Luke would be crushed by guilt. He already felt crushing responsibility in the original trilogy. Just because someone made a good character arc and became a better person in one film does not mean they will not have problems throughout their life. The depiction of fans of Luke is as this flawless hero who can do no wrong, who is a paradigm of morality, yet the films differ on that. And I think fans have blinded themselves of Luke's flaws in favor of this vision of him as the dashing hero, in no small part inspired by Legends canon, oversimplifying his character to be just the hero. But as we see in this film, it deconstructs that image to say, hey, the image you've constructed of Luke is built on impressions of Luke. Luke never does anything that spectacular throughout any of the films, but his impact is felt because of the choices he makes. In The Last Jedi, when Rey is trying to convince Luke of his heroism of the past, she doesn't reference beating Darth Vader. She doesn't reference destroying the Death Star. She references redeeming Darth Vader. The choice to help him heal is his strength, not his power or skill with a sword.
Yes, the most hated man in the galaxy, but you saw there was conflict inside him. You believed that he wasn't gone, that he could be turned.
Luke is never the strongest figure in the room. He pales in comparison to Darth Vader and Palpatine. But his choices inspire greater change in others, and likewise, The Last Jedi shows that Luke's decisions can inspire great change in the world, for better or for ill. He doesn't have to come in with a big laser sword and fight, but he is inspiring to those around him. He is the linchpin through which change is made.
We are what they grow beyond.
That, or they feel emasculated because of the film, which they directly said.
It also made sure to emasculate and humiliate every male character possible, portraying them variously as weak, cowardly, ineffective, untrustworthy, unfairly portraying them as deeply flawed and wrong, robbing them of any possible redemptive and heroic moments, or making previously ruthless and competent antagonists into the butt of ridiculous jokes.
It's anti-meat. It's anti-war. It's anti-Poe. It's anti-Poe.
In each storyline, the male characters are portrayed as stupid, impulsive, and pretty much useless. If you think about it, it was one of the first Star Wars films without a strong male role model for young boys to look up to.
And of course, taking every opportunity to elevate the female characters in every way possible, portraying them at all times as highly intelligent, skilled, competent, wise, compassionate, and right about absolutely everything, because that's definitely how things work in the real world.
The mentality seems to be, throughout the Star Wars fandom, that the saga's ruined, apparently. But what's funny is, some of the best Star Wars material is made by people who are least anchored to the fandom. Dave Filoni does a lot of good stuff, but I can't help but feel his more recent projects are stale. They're very rooted in continuity that you need to know if you even hope to untangle some of why we should care about certain characters. Now, thankfully, with Ahsoka, Hela and Sabine, they're easy to follow without too much backstory, but part of the series' conflict is rescuing Ezra. Why would I care who Ezra is if I haven't already seen Star Wars Rebels? However, by that same metric, different filmmakers come in with very different ideas of what Star Wars should be, and they produce some of the best stuff under Disney. Skeleton Crew, as mentioned before, is a show aimed for families, and it's frankly disinterested entirely with bigger lore of Star Wars. Then there's Tony Gilroy's Andor, which presents a portrait of living in the Star Wars universe with brutal, cruel honesty.
I wake up every day to an equation I wrote 15 years ago from which there's only one conclusion. I'm damned for what I do.
Examining all systems of control in a fascist regime, as well as the means through which an ordinary person can become radicalized to join a rebellion.
I was always eager, always waiting to be inspired, and now I'm dead. And I yearn to lift you.
And some fans just don't like that. I remember watching Star Wars Theory's reaction to the recent season of Andor, and he was so stunned that a fascist officer would assault an innocent woman that he couldn't compute. No, Star Wars Theory, even if Vader wouldn't approve, it doesn't really matter in the scheme of things, because these guys don't talk to Vader on the weekends. They don't give him an update. Oh, hey, Vader, how's it going? You know, I did this to a poor woman, you know, whatever. It's a scene of real violence. This is a scene of realistic violence. And it's a work of social satire. And the parts of the fandom that are most vocal about the jokes in The Last Jedi and how immature Disney Star Wars is, the so-called fandom menace, they seem pissed off. It's wild. I mean, some are. A lot aren't. A lot get it that this is a mature story, but enough aren't. And look, if you want to see the dark and edgy Star Wars you're dreaming of, just watch Rebel Moon. That's exactly what you're looking for. It's a case of just violence being confused for substance, for edginess being confused for maturity, and you'll get what you're looking for. Audiences didn't like it, but that's your version of Star Wars that you probably would want to see. Now, I remember mentioning about a half hour ago Masato Katsuragi from Evangelion. Remember that? And I can't help but think back to Evangelion when I think about The Last Jedi. Because Evangelion, like The Last Jedi, deconstructs a genre. And I would argue deconstructs it far more harshly than The Last Jedi ever could. The Last Jedi, however, I think elicits more anger because it's criticizing the series it's a part of, whereas Evangelion is criticizing the genre of mecha anime. Rian Johnson's Knives Out is another case of deconstruction where I think it's a really good movie. I think Knives Out's much better than The Last Jedi, personally. But it deconstructs the cozy mystery. But it's not an adaptation of a Hercule Poirot novel by Agatha Christie. I feel like fans are more receptive to criticism when it exists outside of their piece of fandom. Rebel Moon, for example, if that were a Star Wars film, would probably be more widely reviled than it is now. But because it's just a sci-fi series by Zack Snyder, we can forget about it. But likewise, the criticism of Galaxy Quest is very well received by Star Trek fans, to the point, even though it makes fun of the fandom to a lesser extent. Because it's receptive, but I think because it's outside of Star Trek, it's been embraced by fans of Star Trek. I think ultimately, though, Disney made the biggest mistake trying to appease the fans who are angry, you know? They heard fans were upset that The Last Jedi wasn't enough like what came before. It wasn't tied in enough with nostalgia. It wasn't tied in enough with what they loved before. And Disney responded by creating market-tested continuations. Slop, essentially. The fandom menace criticized Star Wars relentlessly for breaking free of breaking away from George's vision. Well, now you're getting what you wanted. You're getting something that adheres so closely to the words that George Lucas wrote originally that it refuses to try anything new. And the only exceptions are distinct because of how they did something different. Your criticism is now why we're living in the boring reality where Star Wars exists only as a nostalgia piece, where it refuses to grow in creative and unusual ways. Because even failure we can learn from. Even a failed project that you don't necessarily enjoy can bring something new to the table that later filmmakers can build upon. Even a failure can sometimes inspire interest. It is better to be a spectacularly interesting failure than a boring success, which is what Star Wars in many regards has become. A boring success of sequentially boring entries. Everything is safe outside of the few exceptions, and once those few exceptions run their course and end, like Andor is set to end, the enthusiasm you'll have for the entire series will diminish, because they are not allowing creativity back.
What Star Wars fans ultimately asked for was nothing new. They wanted nothing of the creativity that Johnson brought. And nothing will come of nothing.
The few remnants that are the creative branches of Star Wars, they're drying up, and we're left now with safe options. Maybe we'll get something new. I think James Mangold's super prequel Origin of the Jedi movie sounds neat if it ever gets made. But until we see evidence that there is a spark of creativity left, I can only assume that what we're going to be getting out of Star Wars from here on out are safe pieces of work. Mainly because Disney got cold feet the moment anyone tried something very different because the fans wholly rejected it. I want to issue a thanks to the Fandom Menace because congratulations. All the slop you've complained about for the last several years, that's on you. You helped create it. You showed with your wallets and your loud rage that, hey, Star Wars should be just the same 5 stories over and over again. We shouldn't ever evolve beyond the couple of bloodlines we establish. We should just stick right here. And despite you complaining about, say, a black person showing up in Star Wars, the products themselves have suffered because they are stagnant. They are refusing to advance. They are stenciled into the empty spaces between other, better movies that had more freedom to do whatever they wanted. This is what you asked for. If you're complaining about Star Wars right now, I only ask you this. Did you really consider what you wanted when you insisted that Rey had to be born from some established character? Did you really consider how you just wanted the legend stories readapted over and over again as opposed to something new and original? Something different? Something unique and exciting? Did you really ask yourself what you wanted when you begged for an Obi-Wan show for so long? Did you really know what you wanted? Because you're getting it now, and all of us are bored by it.
The movie for me was a good conclusion to episodes 7, 8, 9. 8, I don't really even count as a Star Wars movie because it just doesn't feel like it, and also this movie doesn't really validate anything to do with 8. It completely, you literally don't have to see episode 8 to see this film. So, with that being said, this is really like this is like the real episode 8. I feel like it was good. I really enjoyed where it went. I felt like a lot of it was, sure, rushed, but that's fine, you know? Just keep rolling, you know? It was okay. I was okay with that.